My name is Mel Lehman, and I am the director of Common Humanity. And Common Humanity seeks to build understanding, friendship, and respect between people here in the States and people in the Middle East. We often do that through art. We have some Iraqi painters we're going to be showing you 2 weeks from today and continuing. We've done that in the past. We see the beauty of the Middle East, but we also want to see some of the conflicts and help people to understand some of the issues that are involved there. Today, we have a wonderful guest. His name is Dan Hood, and there he is beside me. I can say wonderful because I've known this good man for quite a few years now. And I have been to Palestine, Israel with Dan together, but I didn't make it as far as Hebron, and Dan has. So Dan, welcome. It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing. We have seen paintings in the past, and today we're going to see some pictures, and I'm going to stop talking very soon and let Dan tell us about his visits to Hebron. Dan Hood is a sociologist and former college professor. He has published books that critically compare the uses of religion and science in treating drug use problems, people who have drug use problems. Since 2014, he has visited Hebron 4 times on the West Bank, including a 3-month stay in 2016. His most recent visit was 2018. So you are in a very good position to tell us about this very difficult place, and welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some pictures. See if my slide journey works here. Hang on. Journey to Hebron, and here we are outside Hebron. We're seeing a group of tourists. Another group of tourists, we're seeing your delegation from a couple years ago.
No, actually, that is a group of tourists.
Oh, okay.
This is from the last time I was there in 2018, when I was hanging out with an organization called Youth Against Settlements, which is a totally local Palestinian operated organization. Before I had been with other internationals. And I helped lead this particular tour. One of the reasons that I was asked to help lead it is there are areas in Hebron that local Palestinians can't enter, particularly one street, Shuhada Street, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
And so I, as an international, who had been there before and knew some of the story, could take over that part of the tour when Isa Amaro, who is the director of Youth Against Settlements, couldn't accompany us.
So special access as an international. Let's take a look at a map, just a couple of maps. Here's a little bit of a broader picture. There's the Mediterranean. There's Cairo, Egypt, on the bottom left. There is Lebanon at the top, Beirut, Damascus. We had a program on Damascus a little while ago. And here's Jordan on the way to Baghdad. I've traveled through Amman. And here is where we're going to be talking about the West Bank. If you can see my pointer there, in Israel, Palestine. We're going to be talking about that. A little bit below here is about a 40-minute drive, I think you said, is Hebron. So let's take a look at the next slide, which is a very common site that people who have studied this issue have seen. It's called Disappearing Palestine, and you have been to that part that is beginning to disappear, Dan.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and let's take another look at a closer view, which is, this is the kidney-shaped West Bank. And here again is Jerusalem in the middle. And what is the significance, Dan, of the red and the shaded white?
Well, Palestine, or the West Bank, is divided into 3 administrative areas, A, B, and C. And Area C, that's in the red, is controlled entirely by the Israelis. The white parts are what's left to the Palestinians. When the division was made in 47 by the UN, the Palestinians were supposed to be in control of that whole kidney-shaped map. which they were at the beginning. But through the installation of colonial settlements of Israelis, the Israelis have shrunk the area that's available for Palestinians to live, and they end up, as you can see, with islands of population, and those are often separated by settlements, so that the Palestinian community is broken up into Bantustans or something like tribal areas in the Native American experience, which is a way to dissipate their power in controlling their own circumstances.
What are we looking at here? We're looking at some traditional ruins of stones building there on the left, and we're looking at what else here?
Those are olive trees. These are very young olive trees. They can't be more than a decade old. And they're thriving. But I think the next slide is going to show the burnt trees. Nope, that's not the next slide. I'm sorry.
That's 2 slides away. These are harvesting.
Skip ahead. Go ahead, skip ahead.
Okay.
Yes. These are trees that were the same age as the others. They were actually almost side by side. These trees have been burned with a napalm-like substance by Israeli settlers as a means of destroying Palestinians' source of income and traditional way of life.
Yeah.
And they continue to do that in many forms. I've read a lot of reports this year about Israeli settlers actually cutting down the trees of the Palestinian farmers as a means to destroy their livelihoods.
And we're seeing, if we look very closely, we're seeing some people in white shirts, and a little more difficult to see, but clear there, a little bit next to them are men in green shirts. What is the difference there?
The green shirts are IDF forces, so-called Israeli Defense Forces. Palestinian activists like to refer them as IOF forces, or Israeli Occupation Forces, which is in effect what they really are. The guys in the white shirts are young Israeli men, settlers who live nearby, who have just been escorted away by the soldiers, away from a Palestinian farmer who was harvesting his crop and who these young men were harassing in various means, including throwing stones at him.
And this is a closer look at the Israeli soldiers, who seem to be all over the place.
Yeah, oh yeah. This area of Hebron, which is called H2, is about 20% of the city, including the old city, which includes the Ibrahimi Mosque, which is a center of controversy for decades, if not centuries.
Yeah.
And this is the only area in the West Bank where the Israeli military, particularly the military, is in total control.
Okay.
Administrative as well as policing functions.
And during your stay there, you told me you had some work with the olives. People from the international community, including you, are trying to build a bridge to help get out the word about this harassment that's happening. Is that a good way to summarize this?
Sure, that's true.
And you said that you did a lot of work, and at the end of the day, harvesting olives, you were ready to sit down. I remember you said.
Well, this was an earlier trip, probably 2015 or 14, and I spent the whole day. We spent the whole day, our delegation, picking olives just to get the feel for it. And at the end of the day, I was then something like 76 years old. I was pretty tired.
Well, you did great for. Here's some other locals. These are local folk here, and you met them. And what kind of vibes did you get from the Palestinian olive farmers? What kind of feeling did you get from them?
They're just basic peasant folk trying to make a living, grow their families. This is a single family. They were all out in the olive grove that day, and this is when they paused for lunch.
And here's a young lady that one of your delegations had met. And what was the basic message that she would like to get out to folks like us that are just learning about the situation?
I'm not sure I know what her basic message is. These two folks are both volunteers for the Christian peacemaker teams, which are basically there to observe and record and report human and civil rights violations by the Israeli forces and the Israeli settlers against the local Palestinian population. She is fairly obvious, a Palestinian. She worked largely in the office doing clerical work, but this day she came out with us to the olive groves to participate in what we call protective presence. Simply put, when internationals are there, while the Palestinian farmers are doing their work, it's much less likely that they will be attacked or harassed by settlers and or military forces.
Right.
And the practice typically is the settlers come in, cause havoc, and the soldiers come along with them and just stand around to make sure that the Palestinians don't fight back.
Wow. Well, let's take another look at life in Hebron. And what are we seeing here? This looks like a cage of some sort.
It's very much like a cage of some sort. It's called a checkpoint. And in this case, it's a checkpoint, an internal checkpoint, which is extremely rare and also illegal in international affairs. It's set up between two Palestinian neighborhoods. And one of the jobs of the observers was to observe every morning there was school, because Palestinian children had to pass through these checkpoints. There's a couple of school teachers passing through the turnstiles, and you can see it is virtually a cage. And of course, the soldiers who man these checkpoints have control over the turnstiles, and they can, and often do, lock them up and trap people inside the cages until they can search them or simply harass them by other means. So the children have to do this every day on the way there and on the way home. That's another example of protective presence. Hopefully our presence at those checkpoints will keep the soldiers in check.
And these are children on their way to school who have to suffer the indignity of walking through a junk heap?
Yes. These are kindergarten kids who we escorted every day, basically up the hill from the neighborhood where they lived to the mosque, to the kindergarten, which was in one of the rooms in the Ibrahimi Mosque.
And again, a presence of the soldier. Here is a young man looking directly at you.
He is. This is what I call my soldier. He and I had an encounter just before this picture was taken, and I had annoyed him, at least, if not insulted him, unintentionally. I didn't know what I was doing. Well, I may have known what I was doing, but I didn't intend to insult him. But I can't remember what it was. But as a result, he was embarrassed, even humiliated in front of his peers. He got very angry. But of course, as an international, I was totally protected. Had he done anything like attacked me physically, he would have been in serious trouble. So what he did instead was, as we were leaving the area, he followed me off my right shoulder with his weapon at the ready, as you can see. And for about 4 or 5 blocks. And at one point I turned around and snapped this picture, and that sort of began to discourage him, and he finally just peeled away.
We're seeing what here with these young men?
Palestinian men, probably teenagers, who are being detained on the main street through the old city by elite Israeli troops. You can tell they're elite by their red berets, for something like walking while Palestinian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very unlikely that they've done anything serious,
Mm-hmm.
but they will hold him there for hours, perhaps, search them. What they like to do with young men in particular is make them hoist up their shirts and show their bare midriff so they can, presumably to see if they have weapons. They almost invariably don't.
And why is Hebron such a contentious spot? Hebron. What's the main issue that is fueling?
Hebron is an important city, a sacred place in both Islam and Judaism. The center of that sacredness is the Cave of the Patriarchs, which is supposedly the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives. And a famous mosque today called the Ibrahimi Mosque, huge building, is built over the caves. And so Hebron is second to Jerusalem as a holy city, and is one of the 4 holiest cities in Islam.
And here we are seeing a central place of Hebron called Shuhada Street.
Shuhada Street, yes. Shuhada Street is the Street of Martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
It was originally a market street. The wall on the left, which you can't really see the facing of, is lined with shops of produce wholesalers. It was a center of trade in this area. It was closed down after a massacre at the mosque, a massacre of Palestinians by a radical Jewish leader, originally from the United States, who had moved to Israel to be part of one of the settlements.
This was like what, 20
years? Sorry. As a result of that, the street was closed down to Palestinians. This is the street where I led the tour that we talked about a couple of slides ago, because Palestinians are not allowed on the street. The 2 characters that you see there are settlers. One of them is carrying an AK-47 type of firearm, which they do openly and which is legal for Israelis but not for Palestinians. This was a holiday weekend,
right?
And they were on their way to the festival, which was down at the end of this street.
Okay.
So all of those shops, which lined the left side of the wall. I'm on the roof of the wall taking this picture. Are shut down, locked, and inaccessible, even though people live on the other side of them. They have to use back entrances to go in and out of their homes.
Yeah.
They no longer have access to the front doors.
This is the barricade we spoke of?
Yeah, the wall in the background is part of that wall that I just talked about.
Right.
It was built by the Israelis. This is Chicken Street. Used to be the central poultry market in the city. It's pretty much shut down. Yeah. The green doors there that you see closed are closed permanently.
And here are some shops.
There's no access from the Palestinian part of town to that street anymore.
Right. And these are shops that we've seen them close, but here's a
Well,
nice.
this is a different street. And so the shops, this is another street lined with retail shops of all kinds, some with produce, some with, as you see, jewelry and other, I think those are blankets and sweaters and scarves and things like that that are made locally by the local Palestinians, and sold mostly to tourists, basically.
Yeah.
But it's a lively commerce area.
Mm-hmm.
This is another end of that same street. Early in the morning, the shops aren't opened yet, and the barrier over the street, you see the crisscross wires over the metal framing. In this situation, the bottom, the first floor is Palestinian, and above that, in the second and third floors, is one of the local Israeli settlements,
Wow.
which are illegal,
So right on top of each other.
law. And what the settlers do often is drop garbage and excrement down on the Palestinians
Wow.
who are walking back and forth and doing business below.
Hmm.
And they've had to erect that barrier to protect themselves from that kind of indignity and harassment.
Wow. Wow. I am having a slight problem. There we go. So the international presence we mentioned earlier, these are internationals and locals. Tell us about the lady with the red scarf and the other people.
The red scarf was my supervisor while I was there for the 3-month stint with CPT.
Mm-hmm.
And the two people in the middle there in the blue and gray uniforms are workers for TIPH, TIPH, which stands for, can I remember what it stands for? It stands for Temporary International Presence in Hebron.
There you go.
Temporary International Presence in Hebron. This is a professional organization authorized by the Oslo Accords
Mm-hmm.
to watch what goes on in Hebron in particular,
Mm-hmm.
to observe and document
Mm-hmm.
violations. And in 2017, they came out with a report that excoriated the Israeli behavior and constant, regular, daily violations of Palestinian rights, simple human rights. And as a result, Israel expelled the whole organization.
Oh, wow.
The other guy is a local. They're discussing a recent arrest. You can see the soldiers behind them. They have just arrested a young man, presumably for throwing rocks at a soldier. And the community gathers when this happens and tries to find out what's going on and see if they can intervene in any way. The local on the right is, I think, a relative of the young man who was arrested. There certainly were relatives there.
And what is the lady's name that you work for? With the
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And these are folks from where?
This is a night off for people who do this kinds of observing jobs day in and day out. This is at a local Hebron restaurant, which serves, along with food, hookah pipes. The two ladies on the left, and they would hate that I called them ladies, so I apologize, are from Christian Peacemaker teams, and the woman on the right is from ISM, the International Solidarity Movement, which is a British and Palestinian organization that does much the same kind of observation and recording and reporting to the UN the instances of violation.
Right.
Again, day in and day out. This is This is a sheikh, a genuine Bedouin sheikh, who lived in a village south of Hebron. It's called Al-Arakib, and it's famous for having been destroyed the whole town demolished by Israeli military forces 119 times as of 2017. And he's in a tent. We're visiting him, one of the delegations visiting him. This was probably 2015, one of my early visits there. He has a cell phone to his ear. As you can see, he's in traditional garb and seated on traditional furniture and gesturing to us with a very nice watch on his wrist. He's actually a few feet from the village's graveyard, which is the only thing the Israelis won't destroy. So once they destroy it, the folks come back a few months later, they rebuild the village by the cemetery, and then the Israelis come back and wipe it out. They consider it an illegal residence, an illegal community, because it predates the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has no valid deed from the Israeli government to build on that site, even though it's been there for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
If not,
and I would note, as one who has spent a fair amount of time in the wonderful folks of the Middle East, the legendary Middle East hospitality is very much in view here. Not one, but two carafes of coffee. And his village has been destroyed how many times? Several, whatever.
Well, at that time, it was about 90.
90 times.
2 years ago, it was 119, according to the New York Times.
Oh my goodness! And he's still there with his coffee, welcoming visitors. The genuine good hearts of folks.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. There were about 15 of us seated around, and it was a great afternoon.
Yeah, we have just about reached our half-hour mark, but it was so interesting. We're going to go over just a little bit. We ask indulgence of our viewers, but we try to keep it to a half hour, and we'll do our best. This is a view which is across the street, and we've been looking at these very difficult, violations, and here it is summarized in the Geneva Convention, which is the international standards by which we look at these conflicts. And let's read this, if you would. This is right across the street from the settler houses, I think you said?
Yeah, this is on the back wall of the Youth Against Settlers building, where I stayed the last time I was there. And it's the back porch, basically, and it faces directly behind it a settlement house where a number of settler families live. And of course it says, transfers of the civilian population of the occupying power into the occupied territory, forcible or voluntary, are permitted.
Mm-hmm.
Reprisals against protected occupied persons or their property is prohibited, and reprisals go on day in and day out. We haven't even seen an example of the worst of them. Yeah. Confiscation of private property, which is what happens when every Israeli settlement is built by the occupant, is prohibited, and that's part of the Geneva Convention. And those strictures are violated regularly, every day, day in and day out.
Yeah. Well, let us end on a seasonal note. I think we have some questions, and we're going to go to questions in a moment. But it was a great memory of mine, Dan, when you and I visited together. We traveled together here, and we were both on Manger Square. I was not here with you when this picture was taken. Tell me the moment, the special moment, and any memories you have of this special moment.
This was 2016, when I had been there for 2 months already. And this is Christmas Eve, 2016. That's the Christmas tree is the main decoration on Manger Square. It's actually very much like the Christmas tree that's erected in my apartment complex every year. And the folks at the desk in the foreground are looking for seats in a restaurant that's just behind them, to the right, actually not behind them.
And somewhere near here, I don't have my directions quite right, but this is Manger Square. It takes its name from the manger, away in a manger in which Jesus was born.
Yeah, the Church of the Nativity, which is the traditional site of the birth of Christ, is to the left of the Christmas tree.
Right.
100, 150 yards or so.
Right.
Um,
And we might note that both
Let me
Muslims,
just add that Christianity is much more obvious and available, I guess you could say, um, in Bethlehem than it is in Hebron. Hebron is a purely Muslim city.
Mhm. And we might note that both Muslims and Christians are looking forward to the Christmas season, and Muslims and Christians join together in a great festive moment here in Manger Square. I think that's my memory of that moment. Well, let us get back together here, and I'm going to see if we have any questions. But we ask all of our guests this one single question: what is something that we can do for peace in this very torn world of ours, which doesn't seem to be getting very much better very quickly? What is something that the average viewer who has not been to Hebron can do for peace?
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
Yeah. No, I'm asking you. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, when you ask me what I learned,
Yes.
I have a quick statement that
Yeah.
I like to read so that I can be precise about it. One of the things I've learned in particular is that there's very little gray area or ambiguity in the so-called conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. To my mind, and I can support this with formal documentation as well as my own direct experience in Hebron, it's a matter of right versus wrong, more so than almost any other issue I know about at this point in time. Especially since the Palestinians have abandoned the use of force and disavowed the use of force in their struggle, and the Israelis clearly have not, because they use it every day. This is nowhere clearer than in Hebron. The international community needs to ramp up efforts to influence Israeli policy in the right direction, and Americans, especially its politicians, need to disavow their dependence on IPAC, the American Israeli political organization, both in its financial dealings, contributions, which virtually every American politician receives, and its policy advice, which it basically buys with its contributions. The struggle between Palestine and Israel, I believe, can be symbolized in the classic Old Testament story of David and Goliath. Only the vectors of value are reversed. Israel and Zionist nationalism is Goliath today, while the Palestinian cause for liberation is the David, clearly on the side of the angels, if not entirely angelic. And the best thing we can do for peace, I think, is to, first of all, support the ABD movement, the I'm sorry, the phrase has escaped me at the moment.
Sanctions and divesting?
Yeah, ways, excuse me, I'm boycotting Israeli products, especially Israeli products that are produced in the illegal settlements, and in other ways appeal to our government officials to change their support of the Zionist project and the occupation of Palestine.
Yeah. Dan, you have done a great job in helping us to see this. We had a couple questions. Here's one from Merv. Is there a rhyme or reason to the division demarcations? The divisions look very piecemeal. Good question from Merv.
Is he referring to the map?
I believe so, yeah.
The rhyme and reason is the placement of Israeli settlements.
Yeah, yeah.
And they purposely place them between two Palestinian villages or towns to make it more difficult for them to work together and maintain wider community.
Yeah.
There's a very direct, obvious reason.
Yeah. Well, we are pushing towards our 40-minute mark, and I do want to respect our push. Any final thoughts that you want to offer? While you're thinking of that, I want to invite our folks back in 2 weeks. We're going to try to stick to a 2-week schedule as we do this, and we're a very special program in 2 weeks, which are going to be Iraqi artists remembering the holidays in Iraq. I'm sure they'll be telling us about Christmas memories in Iraq. Very interesting program. And we'll have some Christmas shopping opportunities for you in December the 5th. That's 2 weeks from today. We have a website, commonhumanity.org. It takes some funding to produce these programs, to pay for the computer, to pay for the Wi-Fi. Contributions would be most helpful in helping us continue as we plan to do. Dan, thank you very much again. It is great to have you with us as a friend, and you've been so articulate in helping us to see this very difficult part of a complicated situation. You've lent a great deal of clarity and humanity. And thank you, Dan, very much.
It's my pleasure.